The first theory in the timeline are the classical approaches. Firstly, the machine metaphor in the 19th century focuses on the importance of specialization, where each person has only one specific standardized task, allowing the job to be easily replaced. Errors may also be easily identified given that it can be predicted due to the standard rules applied or misapplied. Moving on to the 20th century comes Fayol's theory of classical management. It involves 5 stages starting with planning, which determines the best way to attain organizational goals, organizing, which is the arrangement of human resources based on their strengths, command, where managers set tasks for employees to meet organizational goals, coordination, to harmonize and facilitate activities among departments, and lastly, control, where goals and activities are being compared to ensure compliance between departments and the functions of an organization goes as planned. Weber's theory of bureaucracy was introduced in 1946 with the 5 facets of bureaucracy. An organization should have a clearly defined hierarchy, division of labor, centralization of decision-making and power, a relatively closed system, importance of rules, as well as functioning authority. There are 3 forms of authority, including traditional authority, referring to legitimate authority, charismatic authority, which is based on an individual's personality, and rational legal authority, which refers to the power based on rational application of rules developed through a reliance on information and expertise. This is followed by Taylor's theory of scientific management in the early 20th century, as he came up with 4 components of scientific management. The first component is that there's one best way to do every job. This is supported by the time and motion studies, where he analyzes dozens of different methods to determine the best and most efficient method. The second component is a proper selection of workers, where employees should be selected scientifically. The third component is training workers in a manner suggested by the time and motion studies. Lastly, there should be inherent differences between management and workers, where managers focus on the thinking and planning while workers focus on the work. Moving on to the human relations approach is the Hawthorne studies by Elton Mayo from 1924 to 1933. Mayo and the research team found that worker output is directly proportionate to attention. This is also known as the Hawthorne effect, where more attention directly attributes to a higher level of productivity. Secondly, worker output increases through social factors, and it is suggested that it is best to group them in groups of 6. Thirdly, management style can account for some, but not all, of the changes in productivity. Between 1943 and 1954 is our favorite theory, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This theory suggests that the basic needs of the employee should be satisfied before achieving productivity. In the 1960s comes Theory X and Y theory by Douglas McGregor. This theory categorizes leaders into 2 groups. Under Theory X, leaders are responsible for organizing, and he believes that employees should be controlled and motivated, as he views his employees as indolent, unambitious, self-centered, passive and resistant to change, as well as gullible. On the flip side, Theory Y leaders have a more positive view on their employees. They assume workers are motivated to satisfy achievement and self-actualization needs, and they bring out natural tendencies of intelligence. Under the human resources approach are 2 other theories in the 1960s. The first theory is the Blake and Moulton's managerial grid, where it compares the concern for people to the concern for production. The second theory is the Likert system, where each system represents from the worst scientific and classical management styles to the best. For system approaches, Carl Weick's theory of organizing was introduced in 1969. Enactment is the resolving of equivocality through an enacted environment by means of sense-making and retention. All of us bring meaning and enact information differently, as we are all different individuals. Process of enactment then again brings about equivocality and thereafter sense-making. Equivocality essentially means inherent unpredictability in the information environment. Thus, to minimize this and confusion in the information environment, we have sense-making to make sense of things. This is done through assembly rules and communication cycles, where both processes guides members in set patterns and communicate to talk things out, respectively. When things work well, we will definitely retain the procedures. That's retention. For the culture metaphor, there are 2 approaches to culture: the prescriptive approach and descriptive approach. Firstly, for the prescriptive approach, we have Dewey Kennedy's strong cultures and Peter and Waterman's excellent cultures. For strong cultures, there are 4 key components. Firstly, values are the beliefs and visions that members hold for an organization. Second, Heroes are the individuals who come to exemplify an organization's values. And third, rites and rituals where the organization celebrates its values. And lastly, the cultural network is the communication system through which cultural values are instituted and reinforced. For excellent cultures, Peter and Waterman identified themes that emphasize the importance of the people and downplay bureaucratic structure and values. Now, for the descriptive approach, it describes that organizational cultures are, firstly, complicated, where there are many layers similar to an onion. Second, emergent, focuses on communication processes through which culture is created. Third, are not unitary, where there is no single culture but instead a multitude of subcultures within an organization. And lastly, ambiguous, where there is not always a clear picture of the organization's culture and are difficult to interpret. Under constitutive approaches, the container metaphor was a past metaphorical framework that saw organizations as a thing that holds communication within which communication occurs. Moving beyond this framework is the communicative constitution of organizations that followed social constructionism, which began in 1992 to understand the complicated processes through which our interactions create, recreate, and change organizations. According to Giddens' structuration theory, which brings up about the agency of participants and structure that the agents draw on while they interact. Agency refers to their free will, choice of reacting. Structures are the rules and resources that guide and constrain our behavior. The duality of structures would then refer to how there are always ways that agency of actors can go against set guidelines, and it is possible that structures can be changed. The Montreal School of Thought approach main core is the co-orientation, where people coordinate activity through interaction, and this is achieved through interlinked ideas of text and conversation. For McPhee's four-flow approach, the first flow is membership negotiation, which organizations are communicatively constituted through people who bring the organization into existence and enter and exit over time. Communication processes are varied and continuous. Next is the self-structuring flow, which are the processes that serve to provide guidance and create rules about how work is accomplished. Activity coordination flow refers to the ongoing interaction that is necessary to get work done in an organization. Lastly, the institutional positioning flow is a process where the organization takes to establish itself as a viable partner or create an image that positions itself well in the public. The critical and feminist approach adopts a radical frame of reference by considering organizations as sites of dominion. There are four concepts to the critical approaches. Firstly, the pervasiveness of power, where there are two sources of power. Firstly, the control of modes and means of production. Modes referring to the economic conditions of the production process, and the means referring to the actual work processes. Then, there is the control of organizational discourse, where organizational reality is socially constructed by the use of phrases that reinforces dominant power structures, power-laden narratives, and regulatory manuals. Secondly, the ideology and hegemony concept. Ideology refers to assumptions about reality that influences perceptions of situations and events. Hegemony refers to a process that dominant group leads another group to accept subordination as the norm. The controlled group then accepts and actively participates in the control process. Third concept is the resistance, where workers can exert counter-pressure on organization. Fourth, emancipation is the ultimate goal and the process of emerging awareness and communicative action on the part of the oppressed. The theory of consultative control contains three concepts. Firstly, control, where there are different types of control, namely simple control, technological control, and bureaucratic control, and consultative control. Identification, where an individual identifies self with the collective, taking the organization's concerns as their own. Discipline is to reward and punish behavior that conforms with or deviates from the values of the organization. For the feminist approach, there are different types of feminists. Liberal, which refers to how liberal feminists will believe that women should work to gain their fair share of control. Radical feminists would then believe in destruction of male-dominated institutions or to have a total separation of women from these institutions. Standpoint feminists work to highlight and enhance opportunities for marginalized women's voices to be heard within societal dialogues. Most postmodern feminists would then attempt to deconstruct male-dominated meaning systems in order to highlight the woman's perspective. Pluralist feminists would then be the hybrid form of feminism, which becomes responsive to needs that seek social change, yet cannot fully embrace counter-capitalist ideals. Women and minorities in today's organizations face certain obstacles. Firstly, the presence of a glass ceiling, which is a barrier so subtle that it is transparent, yet it is so strong that it prevents women and minorities from moving up in their career. For women, there is an existence of a mummy track, which refers to the assumption that women want to have flexible work arrangements and family support instead of advancing further in their career. Relational barriers in organization systems include exclusion from informal communication. Second, mentor and protege relationship difficulties. For example, how the relationship might be misconstrued to be something more than just work when it comes to a woman in a protege position. Tokenism, which is how the individual becomes a representative of their minority group and are pressured to represent their minority group. For the socialization process, the phases of socialization, it begins with the first stage, the anticipatory socialization stage, where individuals learn about work in general, about a particular occupation, as well as about a particular organization. The second stage is the encounter stage, which is a sense-making stage for the individual who enters the organization, and it involves a variety of formal and informal communication processes. The third stage is the metamorphosis stage, where it is the completion of the socialization process and a newcomer is then accepted as a regular member. For content of socialization, there are two types. Firstly, the role-related information, which are the necessary skill sets for the job. The second, cultural information, is the organization values and norms that are implicit. For communication processes, the first process is the recruiting and interviewing process, where for recruiting, screening, information gathering, as well as a socialization tool. For the second one, the newcomer information seeking tactics, where employees find out more information about their roles as well as about the organization. The third one is the role development process, where individuals interact to define and develop their roles in the organization. And lastly, the organization exit is a process that influences both those who leave and those who are left behind. The final exit is then retirement. For the decision-making processes, there are rational models of decision-making, and there are 5 stages, where we notice a problem that requires a decision, carefully define the problem, search for all the relevant information, develop a set of solutions, and evaluate them before implementing them. An alternative to this is to look at things realistically as a satisfying process to find a solution that will work well enough instead of just finding that one best solution. For small group decision-making, it has 2 models. Firstly, the phase model, which mirrors the normative model in 4 phases such as orientation, conflict, emergence, and reinforcement. The multiple sequence model then represents a variety of decision paths taken by the groups. There's unitary sequence, complex cyclic, and solution-oriented. For dysfunctional decision-making processes, a huge term that's brought up is groupthink, how there is more concern with appearing cohesive and maintaining group relations than there is with making a high-quality decision. Beyond rational group processes, there's a symbolic convergence theory that considers the role of communication such as stories and jokes in creating a feeling of group identity. For the bona fide group perspective, it considers the importance of backstage communication such as hallway conversations. There is a need for collaboration due to the increased globalized workforce present today. Technology also allows for enhanced collaboration across organizational boundaries through techniques. For conflict management processes, conflict refers to the interaction of interdependent people who perceive opposition of goals, aims, and values, who can see the other party as potentially interfering with the realization of these goals. From the definition, there are 3 general characteristics. First, incompatible goals. Second, interdependent behavior. And third, role of interaction. There are also different phases of conflict. First phase will be a latent conflict, where there is ground for conflict to happen. Second, perceived conflict, where at least one party perceives that there is incompatibility and interdependence. Third, Felt conflict, when a party begins to personalize perceived conflict by focusing on a conflict issue and planning conflict management strategies. Fourth, manifest conflict, where conflict is enacted through communication. And lastly, conflict aftermath, where the short-term and long-term effects on the individuals from the conflict. For conflict management styles, there are 5 types. First, avoidance, where there is little concern for own needs and of others. Accommodating, where you do nothing to satisfy your own needs. Third, competition, where you satisfy your own needs at the expense of others. Fourth, compromise, where there is sacrifice fairly from both parties. Fifth, collaborate, where we all reach a solution that benefits both parties. There are also 2 types of bargaining, such as distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining. Distributive bargaining is when the parties work to maximize their own gains and minimize own losses. And lastly, integrative bargaining is when the parties are trying to maximize gains for both parties.